Hey guys, so welcome back to the podcast. It's been a minute, but I had something percolating that I really feel like I wanted to share with you guys. So the title is Why Rebranding Cracker Barrel is an Attack on Western Civilization. So unfortunately, I'm not going to go too in depth with Cracker Barrel. This is more of a microcosm of what we've been seeing for a while as like a systematic undermining of Western culture and Western civilization, Western values. And so I'm going to quickly kind of do a historical context and to break down like what is Western civilization, why it's important, and how we've been huge beneficiaries of Western civilization here in America. One of the things I want to say before I even get into that is, and this is like the most important thing I'm going to say in the whole entire podcast, and this is something that like if you just believe in the Bible, but even if you don't, I encourage you to at least entertain this. That our battle is not even like Republican versus Democrat. It's not capitalist versus communist. It's not, one race pitted against the other. It legitimately is against the devil. Like something we can't see that is who is extremely powerful and potent. And it says this about him in the Bible, just to kind of give you a quick kind of cursory definition of who our enemy is. Because God says in the Bible that we're not ignorant of his schemes. He's called the prince of the power of the air. It says the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus was tempted when the devil took him up. It says this in the Bible. You can read this, in I believe it's in Matthew chapter 4. And the devil said, if you bow down and worship me, I will give you all of these kingdoms. So God has allowed the devil to have influence and power, okay, over the earth. And even in the book of Daniel, an angel was coming to Daniel, and the angel, I believe it was Gabriel, told Daniel that he was prevented from coming to him. This is not hyperbolic, guys. This is not being sensational. This is true. He told Daniel, look, I was delayed getting to you because I was being battled. I was battling against the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, which is clearly known to be principalities over regions, over countries. Not just like a certain community or a certain, like restaurant. No, an actual country. This is not like just story time stuff, guys. This is actual, legitimate reality of who we're facing. And I will say that the enemy uses individuals wittingly and unwittingly. These people, some of them are unwittingly, but there are plenty who are wittingly agreeing with the devil's schemes to effectuate his purposes. And I'll just say one last thing about this, because this will help us understand why there's been such an attack on Western civilization. The enemy hates the Imago Dei. He hates human beings. He hates freedom. He hates prosperity. He hates people living in joy and peace. He can't stand that. And so he'll use whatever system he can, whatever method he can, whatever tactic he can to bring a destruction to beautiful things we have on this earth. And let me just say before I get started, Western civilization, it's important to understand this Western civilization, the governance, the system, however you want to call it, the way of being has brought about the most freedom, the most prosperity, the most success to the most amount of people in the history of the world. And America leads that. They're front and center. As America goes, so goes the rest of the globe. And that's why you're seeing such an intentional attack on the values, the core tenets of what comprises our nation and in Europe. And I'm going to talk about some things like what Europe and America is facing that no other place in the world is facing, the type of threats. Okay, so what is Western civilization? We need to kind of go back to the Roman Empire, right? It says that Jesus came in the fullness of time, right? And so when Jesus was resurrected, you had like the height of the Roman Empire, right? Caesar Augustus was, I believe Caesar Augustus was emperor when Jesus was born. So you have the Roman Empire was at its height, okay, in many ways. So after Jesus was resurrected, you see he gave the Great Commission to his disciples saying, go and disciple the nations, right? And so you had his disciples as well as Paul went all throughout the Roman Empire, discipling and evangelizing the Roman Empire. So much so that within, I believe, was it 400 years, 300 years maybe? My dates, 300 to 400 years. The Roman Empire, which was once so hostile to Christianity, I mean, hostile to the point of like unspeakable horrors and persecutions, that it became a Christian nation ultimately under Constantine's rule. And Constantine ended up establishing an Eastern Roman Empire called Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, Turkey, and which is ultimately known as the Byzantine Empire, kind of like the quasi-Roman Empire after the Roman Empire fell. Anyway, so basically you had the Roman Empire, which became Christian, then the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople really became Christian. Then all of a sudden, as the Roman Empire fell, you see these you see these barbarian tribes pop up all throughout Europe. And one of the main barbarian tribes called the Franks ended up, and again, I'm giving a very cursory explanation here. They became modern-day France, modern-day Germany. You also had England, obviously, and you had Hungary, and you have different nations pop up all throughout Europe, okay? Which ultimately established Western civilization, which we are a byproduct of here in America, as well as Canada, okay? But what are some of the tenets? It's really important here, okay? Some of the tenets of Western civilization are a grid of just God, Judeo-Christian values, okay? That there's morality, right? And this is super important. Restraint and temperance. I'm going to quickly hearken to an interview I heard really quickly. So I heard Ronald Reagan on a interview with Johnny Carson back, I think it was like 1976. It was right after he was the governor of California. And I'm going to paraphrase here because this is very important what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to discuss next. Johnny Carson basically asked Ronald Reagan about, what are the problems of government? And one of the things Ronald Reagan said was, well, government just doesn't know how to say no, okay? One of a core tenet, so to speak, of Western civilization, especially here in America, which was like an infrastructure, a very like foundational thing of our founding, is temperance, restraint, putting parameters up, okay? Edmund Burke, who was one of the great conservative thinkers, okay? And I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but he basically said, look, if there's not something that's consistent, like a way of governance, then we're no different than flies in the summer. One group of flies will show up, die. The next summer, another group of flies will come in, and they're just transient. There's nothing consistent. There's nothing foundational to carry on from one generation to the next. Temperance, restraint, values is super important. And until Jesus literally shows up in the flesh and sets up and I'm not going to get into the eschatology here, but what I'm saying is there's a form of governance that God has chosen to give us as human beings that has been proven to be the most successful in providing freedom and prosperity to people. And that has been inextricably connected to Western civilization, which has culminated in the Democratic Republic of our nation. And so let me just kind of stop there and kind of rewind a little bit, okay? So now we're at Western civilization, okay? I kind of gave you the idea of Western civilization, right? Values, restraint, Judeo-Christian principles, the idea that our rights were not given to us by man, but given to us by God, right? Certain unalienable rights. That's enshrined in our Declaration of Independence, okay? So let me harken back to what I said in the beginning, right? The enemy hates these things. He hates a government that's set up, that has a grid for who God is. He hates it. So ultimately we have to understand some of the things we're seeing on earth right now that they're inexplicable, that make no sense. It helps us to rationalize those, to understand. Well, it talks, I think in the first chapter of Romans, that there's a day coming where people will create new ways of doing evil. Because again, guys, there is a wave of wickedness. The architect behind these things is legitimately the devil himself, okay? And so the people who are attacking Western civilization are doing it, many of them unwittingly, because they're being pawns in the hands of the enemy. And it sounds fantastical, guys, but I'm just speaking the truth. I have no, I'm not getting any monetary support for saying this. I'm just speaking the truth. That is what's happening, okay? So again, so here's where we're at. We're at a point where we understand, this is super important, that the enemy is the architect behind these intentional attacks on Western civilization, okay? And I'll get to Cracker Barrel, but again, that again is just a microcosm of what we're seeing. Let me just mention one thing about how there's been such an overt attack, a systematic attack on Western civilization. Let me talk about mass migration really quickly. I've talked about it before. The only nations in the whole entire world who are dealing with mass migration, we're talking about like millions and millions of people all across the world funneling into our Western civilization countries, in Europe specifically, in America and Canada, okay? Why is that? Is it because they're the most wealthy? Now, certainly European nations are wealthy, many of them, and so is America. But some of the most wealthiest countries, such as China, Japan, Singapore, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, none of them are dealing with any migration problems, right? None of them. You don't see any countries in South America dealing with immigration problems, right? Brazil, Argentina, Chile. You don't see any of those. So just ask yourself this question: why is it the only nations dealing with mass migration are nations in Europe and America? And guys, some people will try to shut down the conversation. This is really sick and nefarious. I've even dealt with this myself. Say, oh, you're talking about the Great Replacement theory. That's just a way to shut down a conversation, and it's a way to race bait, because they can't actually debate or discuss what is actually going on here. And so when you see with that Western civilized nations are the only ones dealing with mass migration, it's not about, again, being kind to the foreigner. That is a euphemism. That's a smokescreen they will use to try to guilt you into just agreeing with this. And again, some of these people have no clue why they're even advocating for it. They're being told this is compassionate. Well, guys, what's happening is, and Germany is a prime example of this, they will leverage the guilt, the sins that happened, decades ago. The people aren't even alive right now who waged this type of sin, such as Nazism in Germany. Are using this as an example. So they guilt-ridden the people of Germany, believing that somehow you have to pay penance for the sins of your great-grandparents, and you need to open the doors of your country and just let anyone in. And so, guys, it's not just so let me kind of backtrack a little bit. So the mass migration is an intentional effort to begin dismantling foundational things. You look in England, for example, right now in London. Western civilization is imperfect, right? As I said, no nation, no civilization is perfect. But if you look at London, with the amount of radicalism, especially Islamic radicalism they've allowed into that nation, into that city, it's unrecognizable. And then people will accuse individuals, oh, if you're opposed to this, you're being a racist, you're being xenophobic. When in reality, if you look at any other nation in the world and you'd ask this question, well, if Saudi Arabia, for example, which is a very Islamic nation, kind of quasi-theocratic, I think they probably would consider themselves theocratic, if they began to acquiesce to this mass migration, and they began to just embrace different value systems from different nations pouring into their country. We don't see that. And you have to ask yourself this question: why? Let's bring it back to my original thesis, okay? The enemy is at work, okay? And he wants to dismantle anything that has any semblance of God. In Western civilization, the governments of Western civilization, while imperfect as they are I wouldn't say the only, but essentially have been governments that have been established with a paradigm of who God is, okay? And so when you see, for example, and this is just in our southern border in America, over 106 different countries were pouring into our nation, okay? And I've talked about, you can go back and look at my other podcasts and talk about the horrors and the statistics of what was going on. But think about why that was happening. You had the previous administration that was allowing this. I mean, 14 million people coming in. And then within 3 months, Donald Trump literally closed the border. This is not hyperbolic, closed the border. And we were being told, I mean, lied to. Think about how even if, guys, you're someone who wants to be, in your words, compassionate. Guys, for 4 years, we were being lied to. We were being told, we can't control this. This is uncontrollable. You have to have Congress to legislate something so we can close the border. It was all a lie. All a sick distortion of the truth. And then Trump comes in and just, he's a mandate. He's the chief law enforcement officer of this country, and he closes the border, secures it. Again, mass migration is probably the singular way these people are systematically trying to eradicate Western culture and Western civilization. Okay? And the people who are coming in, the people who are flooding in, don't even realize what they're doing because it's unsustainable. I don't care what country you are in. I don't care if you're, Uganda. I don't care if you're Singapore. I don't care if you're Siberia. I don't care if you're Brazil. I don't care if you're Taiwan. Anyone who allows 100+ different countries just to funnel into your country unfettered without any sort of checks, without any sort of vetting, it's unsustainable. It's actually unsustainable. And again, you have to ask yourself this question: what is the goal here? Why would they want this? And the people who are behind this, okay, and let me just say here, if you're a Democrat, if you're someone who, and I have people who I love who are Democrats, okay, I genuinely, the Democrat Party, this is a kind of a caveat really quickly, because the Republican Party is far from being innocent. I think Trump, thankfully, has reshifted and has really recalibrated the Republican Party in a real positive trajectory. But what the Democrat Party is become a party of just Trump hatred. So anything Trump does, it's like they have to be like categorically opposed to that. So in many ways, unfortunately, the people in the Democrat Party have become so, they're in solidarity with one another in their opposition to Trump. But I believe it's been easier for the devil to permeate that party, because when there's a party who embraces big government, this is just true because this kind of ties into Marxism and communism, and it doesn't matter what system, and I'm not going to digress here, but the devil will use whatever system he can to bring about destruction. And he'll use any type of like euphemism too, like social equity and all these buzzwords that makes it sound really good. Social justice, So the Democrat Party has become now, and it traditionally been a party of big government, right? So and this is just like human nature, when you begin to give a lot of power to a few people, because when the government begins to have a lot of power, it's really difficult to keep them in check, okay? And so, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's been easier for the devil to entrench himself within that, and I'm not saying everyone in the party is being like, don't get my words twisted, I'm saying the institution, the actual party platform. And so a lot of this, it's inexplicable. Why would someone want to dismantle a system that has given the most prosperity and freedom to the most amount of people? Obviously with its faults. I mean, we can list the faults. You go to a random university and you'll hear 90% of the professors, talking about the sins and how awful America is. And so the Cracker Barrel thing, just getting to that really briefly, it's almost like guilt by association, okay? And some people will say, and I'll just talk about this very quickly, but you have the Cracker Barrel symbol, like the white dude with the barrel, right? Very traditional, very much like, this kind of depicts who America is. And by the way, it's like transcends race. Like Cracker Barrel has always been a very welcoming place to people, okay? But it represents just like America, the history, like the familial, traditional beauty of America in a restaurant chain, And so when you see that being taken away, it's just another example, a microcosm of what we've been seeing for a very long time. And immigration encapsulates it perfectly. But this is being something that, people will talk about, it's just a culture war issue. It's not just a culture war issue. Culture war is not just a culture war. It's not just fighting against like conservatives versus liberals, conservatives versus progressives. It's not about that. Again, you have to pull back the layers and understand that Western civilization is at stake here, and it's not being sensational. And in the Bible, it talks about, the foolish things of God, basically, is the wisdom of the world. Like the foolish things, people will look at certain things we talk about when we have discernment. When God's giving us discernment, people will call that in the world foolish. So me talking about this as like a microcosm of an attack on all of Western civilization, it's not hyperbolic. It's not foolishness. It's actually discernment. I'm not going to sit here and say like, it was obviously stupid. They've lost millions of dollars in revenue and stocks. My opinion is the CEO is ultimately going to get fired. They're probably going to fire their board as well, and they most likely will go back to their original symbol. Hopefully that'll be the case. That's not even the most important thing. By the way, I love Cracker Barrel. I love going there. I'm not going to go there until they change it back to the symbol. That's just my personal prerogative. But again, it's important for us to have eyes to see and ears to hear, because this transcends political party lines. It transcends that completely, guys. And I don't always have to harken back to this, but the reason people hate, the reason why the deep state, the globalists hate Donald Trump, and plenty of these globalists, by the way, are wittingly operating, I believe, with the enemy, with the devil. But I think many of them are unwittingly being just used as pawns. They may not even know why they hate Donald Trump. But I have no problem saying this, that I believe God's presence is on Donald Trump. I'm not saying Donald Trump's perfect. No one is. He has his faults, just like we all do. But what God is doing through him and the anointing on his life, I believe, has brought the absolute venomous attacks on his life, on his career, on his public platform, because his whole presence, guys, is an absolute affront to what the enemy wants to do. When Donald Trump talks about America greatness, when Donald Trump talks about, making America great again, it legitimately is hearkening back to our founding, wanting to give people opportunity, freedom, prosperity, wanting to bring back simple common sense. When you look at simple common sense and pragmatism is tied to like Judeo-Christian values. When you begin pumping moral relativism with this truth, someone will embrace this truth, someone else will embrace something else. It's very similar to what I mentioned with Edmund Burke. When you have like transient ideals, when there's nothing solid that can like be a nexus that can carry from one generation to the next, you will disintegrate. You won't have anything consistent. And that's the beauty of America. That's the beauty of Western civilization. It is having enduring values, enduring morality, enduring virtue. And as much as like the people hate Trump, as much as they want to see him fail, as offensive as he is, he literally is a harbinger of Western civilization. And he may not even realize that himself. I don't know, maybe he does. But when you're seeing him fight for values and fight for common sense, fight for pragmatism, fight for just like the identity of America, fight for law and order, for common sense, guys, that is inextricably connected to what Western civilization is. And so when you see the attack on Cracker Barrel, it's like, as I mentioned earlier, it's a guilt by association. It's almost as if there is this virus, okay? So Western civilization, and this is, when I say virus, this is a good virus, to the enemies of Western civilization, to the devil, for example, we use him because he's, as I mentioned, he's the architect behind this. So when he's like wielding his purposes through people, through organizations, through different systems, when you see the attack on Cracker Barrel, it's like this antidote, this opposition to Western civilization. They see Western civilization as a virus. We have to eliminate it at all costs. So anything in the public platform that is connected to Western civilization, anything, it has to be eliminated. That's why you see the attack on the Pledge of Allegiance. You see the attack on, whether it's prayer in Congress, whether it's prayer in school, whether it's like the nuclear family, anything that is reflecting Western civilization is a virus to them. It has to be eliminated. It has to be taken care of. It has to be eradicated. And guys, it's not like me being hyperbolic. Just look at the evidence. Look at the evidence of the attack on just the family structure. And my best friend from college named John Ensign, he has a podcast called Matters and Meaning. Did a phenomenal job breaking down Marxism and communism. And that has been a system the enemy has used, a philosophy the enemy has used to try to dismantle Western civilization, right? Hates the family. Hates it, is the antithesis of the family. Communism and Marxism. We'll get into that, but hopefully the people in New York City will see this dude up there as a complete pawn, and he's just an individual who's being influenced by really dark forces, okay? Anyway, I'm digressing here. So Cracker Barrel is just guilt by association. You see the dude who just is a good old American dude, right? And you understand, you're like, why does it even matter? This is something that most people enjoy, most people like. What's guilt by association? It has to. It's a virus. It has to. The antidote in their mind has to attack anything that resembles tradition, values, and they can try to bring euphemisms. They can try to sugarcoat it any way they want. But at the end of the day, that is what it is. And for us, I could break it down more, guys, but I feel like I've kind of given you enough. And just be on the lookout and understand this is happening all throughout culture. And it's not just what they want us to do is get into this bickering, oh, this is just a culture war issue, right versus left, conservative versus liberal, Christian versus pagan. It's far more than that. And by the way, if something's evil, wherever it's at, and I don't care if it's evil in the marketplace, if it's evil in government, if it's evil in entertainment, wherever you see that, we have a responsibility to resist that. And we resist it not in our own flesh, not in our own righteous anger, because we have to use discernment. We have to be tied in closely with the Holy Spirit. But we resist it, man. And people can say, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, look, a little bit of yeast permeates the whole batch of dough. And for too long, people in the church, Christians, and I'm calling out Christians, I'm calling out myself, we have for too long sat by idly and allowed this to permeate without, and when I say taking a stand, I don't mean viciously, angrily. I mean with the wisdom of God, the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. That's what I'm saying. But this stuff, guys, is not just an isolated situation with Cracker Barrel. It's happening all over the place. And again, it is indicative of the absolute commitment there is to systematically remove anything connected to Western civilization. All right, I think I have conveyed this soundly. And let me just end with this. What is the kind of exhortation I could give to you? First of all, just be discerning and ask God for discernment, but also just use this as a litmus test. I don't mean you have to what politician is speaking out against Cracker Barrel. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying every politician needs to be talking about this, but when you can look and observe different people with public platforms, such as politicians, if you are noticing individuals who are very passively and pensively engaging with this without taking a stand, it's not culture war stuff, guys. Legitimately, we're talking about people taking a stand for what's true, right, and good. And what I believe right now, what we're seeing there's a chasm being drawn. And really, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian. It's those who are wanting to take a stand for truth and those who are agreeing with the lies. And I'm looking for the guardians of the West, man, to rise up. Just the guardians of the West. And not agreeing with every single thing the West has done that's not been good. But the guardians of the West who are aligning themselves with a infrastructure that God has instituted because he is the one who saw fit to do that through Europe and do that through America. And it's something worth fighting for. It's something worth taking a risk for. And it transcends party lines. So I exhort you guys to discern and look at the people who are in public office, who are willing to take a stand. And I'm really not seeing much of the Democrat Party, to be honest. I'm not seeing many. I'm seeing plenty of people who are leaving the Democrat Party. But maybe there'll be some who rise up. I don't know. I'm not seeing much at all. And so let that be a cautionary exhortation for you. All right. Could talk more about this, but I think I've hammered home what I wanted to hammer home, and I appreciate you guys tuning in, and let's make Cracker Barrel great again. How about that? All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.